So are Canada's tactics of rallying allies working, or is more action required? I spoke to 3 MPs about this earlier this afternoon. Matt DeCourcy is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration and joins us from Fredericton. In studio, here with me, Conservative Foreign Affairs critic Erin O'Toole, and Ellen Laverdiere, you are the NDP's Foreign Affairs critic. Mr. O'Toole, I'd like to start with you. Ambassador McCallum is rejecting your party's suggestion, saying now is the appropriate time for the Prime Minister to pick up the phone and call President Xi Jinping. What is it that your party believes? Why do you believe now is the time for that phone call to happen?
Well, we actually thought it should be several weeks ago. This is a dispute between China and Canada that deepens by the day. There's exchange of rhetoric, more Canadians at risk each week. You know, we have 2 that were detained on security grounds, dozens on administrative visa grounds. Mr. Schellenberg's sentence was turned from 15 years to the death penalty. And there's no sense that there's a plan with respect to these Canadians. There was a modest change to the travel advisory. So things are off the rails, and it takes some leadership to get it back on. So the Prime Minister and Minister Freeland are calling pretty much every other world leader, except for the one that's accelerating this dispute. So show some leadership. Don't wait for a photo op when it's all complete. Mr. McCallum in the press said he's the final arrow in the quiver. Things are bad. Hundreds and thousands of families are concerned. It's time for the Prime Minister to show some leadership, even though it may not be guaranteed success. I think Canadians expect that from their Prime Minister. Ms.
Laverdiere, I see you nodding in agreement. Do you agree with the Conservatives that now's the time to pick up the phone?
I think it would be a good thing to pick up the phone, only to extend an hand and explain the situation again, but, you know, kind of face-to-face, well, by the phone. And what I don't understand is why there could be just one phone call. And I understand the idea of going gradually, but here it's not, it's a special case. We are in the midst of an almost crisis, and I think it would be time indeed for the Prime Minister to step in, and I think it could be made to look as a goodwill gesture, not meaning that we're going to bend or bow to the Chinese government tactics, but just, you know, to start a dialogue or to emphasize that we still want to work with China, but we won't accept, you know, being what some people call being blackmailed or something like that. So, and then if there's some progress, then there can be another conversation. But the government speaks like there can be just one conversation between the Prime Minister and the Chinese leader, and I don't understand why.
Mr. DeCourcy, can we get your response to that? Why is it that the government believes this is the best course forward? We're hearing these arguments from both the Conservatives and the NDP. So what is the win from your perspective in not picking up the phone?
Well, I can tell you that every decision that our government takes in relation to this matter and every decision that our officials make in relation to this matter are based in the present safety and the eventual safe return of these 2 Canadian citizens, in addition to our interactions with the Chinese denouncing the use of the death penalty in the Mr. Schellenberg's case. Our officials are working feverishly to see this diplomatic matter resolved. Our ambassador addressed that today with the media, and I know behind closed doors with the Foreign Affairs Committee. And our government wants to ensure Canadians that we are doing everything within our means to ensure that these 2 are held safe and that we can see their eventual safe return to their families in Canada.
Mr. O'Toole, you said something after that meeting, and we'll get to that meeting in just a moment, but you said something that caught my interest and that I want to expand further on. You said that of the Prime Minister, he wants to wait until everything is solved and he can come in for a photo op that doesn't give any relief to the families of Mr. Kovrig and Mr. Spavor. I'm very curious, have you or anyone in the Conservative Party actually spoken with the families of Michael Kovrig or Michael Spavor, and have they expressed concern that perhaps they're dissatisfied with how the government is responding to this?
We haven't spoken to those families. We have spoken to some families of some of the Canadians that have been detained on visa grounds. So the government's also minimizing the extent of this. They won't talk about how many Canadians are actually detained today. There are more than just the 2 or 3 they talk about. There's many more facing criminal charge. There's many that have been brought in on visa administrative grounds. They're not security grounds. There's been people pulled off planes just transiting through China. This is why people are expecting the government to show that they're putting forth an effort with the Chinese government. We're also concerned because there's been no plan. The Prime Minister was informed ahead of the arrest of the Huawei executive in Canada. Why was that? That doesn't happen normally. It was because they knew it would be a diplomatic sensitive area. What was the plan as a result of that? How long did it take the Prime Minister to reach out? He still hasn't reached out, even though he was informed that this could cause repercussions. There's been no plan.
I just want to understand your argument that you're putting forward there. What is it you're taking issue with the Prime Minister learning about in terms of learning about it beforehand? Is it that, this was a diplomatic issue they should have had? Let me...
Well, the Extradition Act is a federal piece of legislation.
Mm-hmm.
So the Department of Justice, which handles these requests, in this case from our U.S. friends, knew that this would be sensitive. So they took the step to inform the Prime Minister. That's unusual. So what did they do with respect to that? After the arrest took place, well, we know the Prime Minister still hasn't called the leadership there to assure them of the safe and fair process.
I'm just curious, are you saying that the Prime Minister should have intervened and not, and it should
Absolutely
have stopped?
not.
Okay.
The Prime Minister hasn't reached out yet. Minister Freeland hasn't reached out yet. It appears that
I believe
they knew
she's had phone calls. She's had phone calls with the ambassador in Ottawa. I will say that. But if your criticism, it should be further. She has had a series of phone calls with the ambassador here.
What was their plan when they knew this could cause repercussions? It appears like they have done literally nothing until the Canadians were arrested on the ground there. So we still don't see a plan to actually make sure that we can secure the release or even increase consular visits. The Chinese citizen is on bail in Canada with the most fair process in the world, and even her father, the founder of Huawei, is praising that. What are we doing to ensure that there's going to be a fair process in Canada to the Chinese?
And Ms. Leverdier, you're dying to jump in here.
Yeah, because I think that I presume, in fact, I don't know, but I presume that when there's a sensitive case, in fact, that the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office should be warned about that. But I think it's a real question of what was done, right? In the 24 hours after the arrest of Madame Meng, what was done? Did we reach out to the Chinese authorities to say, look, we've had an extradition request to explain the situation, to try to assuage things before they get out of hands? And so now we're faced with that situation. I think the process, the Canadian process, the rule of law process should continue. We don't know how it will end up, but if Madame Meng is extradited to the U.S., yes, we need a plan. And there's part of the plan that I like. I think I mentioned it previously. I suggested it myself, that trying to rally allies. But we also have to think about what's the end game. How can we solve this situation, letting eventually the Chinese government, not being humiliated, saving face in the Chinese culture is very important. Making sure that the Canadians are not are released or at least treated fairly, that there's no death sentence while we continue. So we have to have, I think it's good to have this pressure by many allies, but we need to have a broader plan.
Yes.
And Mr. DeCourcy, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to the criticism here that seems to suggest that the Liberals don't have a plan to sort of navigate out of this situation. What's your response to that?
Well, there are two separate issues here. And on the first issue, with the arrest and the extradition process of Ms. Meng, I would hope that neither of my colleagues would think that the government should politically interfere in a process that's respecting the rule of law, and that's what we have been very clear about doing, respecting the rule of law.
And I don't think Mr. O'Toole
measures.
or Ms. Laverdiere were suggesting that. They're both shaking their heads. But continue. I want you to continue with your response, please.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that we are all in agreement there. Secondly, when it comes to the arrest of Mr. Kovrig and Mr. Spavor, the Foreign Minister, Global Affairs Canada, all of our officials, the Prime Minister have been extremely involved in our plan to see a resolution to that matter. And often we get criticized for diplomacy that is out loud, and in many instances the quiet diplomacy that takes place on these issues is the way that we deal with these sensitive and individual consular matters. Mr. O'Toole raised a number of other administrative issues that have arisen in China. Consular issues are dealt with on an individual basis, day in and day out around the world by the Government of Canada and our consular officials, and we do that in an individualized way, often quietly, often always ensuring, the safety and security and hopeful return of all individuals who are detained abroad.
There's another issue that I want to talk to all three of you about, and it's your reaction to the current situation with another Canadian who is making some headlines today. Kenyan authorities have detained 5 people, including one Canadian, for suspicion of helping al-Shabaab-linked gunmen carry out an attack that saw 21 people killed on Tuesdays. Now, Global Affairs has said they are providing consular services to the family of an individual. Mr. DeCourcy, I'd like to start with you. Is there anything more you can say about this case? And if so, how does Canada deal with an individual if he was in fact involved?
Well, you've heard from our Global Affairs officials that they are providing the services that they are to provide to a Canadian citizen. We also have laws in this country, and we have security measures that look after anyone who leaves Canada to join a terrorist group, and our security officials, we rely on them to maintain that judicial and security process for any individual, whether they are in Canada or abroad.
Mr. O'Toole, Ms. Laverdiere, and we'll end here. Can I get both of what are your concerns about these reports that have just emerged?
We're very concerned. There's been several cases just in the last few days of Canadians detained abroad for, it looks like, radicalized or terrorist acts. Those are very serious issues, and they should be dealt with there. Our concern is we can't allow people that are threats to return. We saw last week that a security threat was accidentally granted permanent residency. Right now,
that was a CBC story.
It was, and it's raised a lot of questions. So I think the government has to be very clear what consular support is being provided, because there is no constitutional right to repatriate these people. We have to look at the security very seriously.
And what we have to do first and foremost is ensure that that person is entitled to a fair process, is treated correctly in prison, and those are the consular services. Then if the judicial process works well there, then we'll have to respect whatever the courts decide. But the main thing is to ensure that the process is fair, that this individual has access to legal services and is treated, including health services if needed, or whatever, correctly, humanly in prison. So I think Canada needs to provide services, but take a step back at the same time.
All right, I want to thank Matt DeCourcy, Aaron O'Toole, and Hélène Laverdiere. Thank you very much for speaking with us today.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.